Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have a newcomer into the temple, one half of the development team of the definitive wrestling RPG, which we'll be getting into tonight. The man best known as Arounx Jorgenson. I hope I got it pronounced right.
No, it's actually a misspelling on that version of the cover I sent you that I'm absolutely okay with. It's Arnaud Jorgensen. It's perfectly fine. I'm surprised we didn't go over that in the pre-show. Hi, I'm Arnaud.
So, thank you for coming on and braving time zone hell to come to my temple.
Absolutely.
But with that in mind, one of the traditions around here is opening it with the humble beginnings. So, walk me through your first introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick.
Well, it stuck the very first time I played it. We, as very young kids, I'm thinking like 7 to 9, my friends and I had heard about D&D. We were really into trying it. We didn't have any of the books. And one day I was at a friend's house and his uncle came over who ran D&D or whatever. And we're like, yeah, we really want to try, but we don't have it. He's like, books? You don't need books to play. Here, I'll GM for you right now. And he took out a D20 from his pocket. And we got my friend's younger brother, myself, around a table. It was very funny. He's like, what class do you want to be? We didn't know what the classes were. He just randomly threw some out there. He had all these wild comments. This is before 2008 when Obama was president, but he had this wild comment. He goes, you want to be a rogue? And it's like, I don't know. I don't want to be sneaky. You don't have to be sneaky. Obama's a rogue. Everyone could be a rogue. He was such a great guy. And he just really ran this wild game where we were in the middle of the forest for no reason, throwing javelins at goblins sneaking up on us. And as a 10-year-old at that point, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And we said, yeah, we don't need any books. And rather than playing Dungeons and Dragons, we just made our own TRPG and played it with D20s as a bunch of kids having fun. And I've sort of never stopped, ever.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, with that in mind, what would you say since this is obviously a RPG about running a wrestling organization, what would you say your first introduction to wrestling in tabletop form was? We can get into your introduction to wrestling as a whole later.
Sure. In tabletop form, it was Worldwide Wrestling RPG, powered by the Apocalypse system.
Mm-hmm.
And I was introduced to it, I think, when they got their second edition. I'm not exactly sure what year it is. And I had friends who were really big into the pro wrestling scene. I'm not so much into it, but they loved it a lot. And they said, hey, run this for us. Because at the time, I sort of, and I still do, I have the policy as basically a forever GM where I go, whatever game you want to play, bring it to me. I will run it for you. I will learn it in a week, run the whole thing. And that's what we did. We ran Worldwide Wrestling RPG. And it was a short campaign, but it certainly left an impression on all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can certainly get it. And obviously, from my perspective, this is certainly not the first wrestling TTRPG I've ever covered in the temple, though it is the first in quite a while. But beyond that, since I kind of hinted at it, even though your partner who is supposed to be here,
He'll hear about it later.
is the bigger wrestling guy. Obviously you had your forays with wrestling, correct?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I think, growing up in the wonderful United States of America, especially on a day such as today, um, it is hard to grow up as a kid with TV and not at least know something about wrestling. I remember when Dwayne the Rock Johnson, I guess John Cena's still big. I know he's on his sort of swan song sort of tour right now. Uh, but with them in the background, I always knew sort of passively kind of what's going on. And I had never watched a show until this year. I had never actually watched a show beginning to end. I'd only ever seen clips. I was much more into watching mixed martial arts and partaking in mixed martial arts myself more so than wrestling. But I knew all the big names. I knew about Randy Orton and Hulk Hogan and everybody like that. And it really was this year, especially, that Nick brought me in and I won't say forced me to watch things, but given that we were building a definitive wrestling RPG, sort of forced me to watch a number of shows, including the most recent Money in the Bank and other shows like that.
Mm-hmm. Which is understandable, and now maybe when Wrestle Kingdom comes along, you'll probably end up watching that, because I'm fairly certain it's not going to be another two-nighter like it was the other year.
I think Nick has a program of things he wants me to watch to really get into it. And talking with you before the interview, you mentioned all these other Wrestle RPGs and all the shows in Japan that I have now written and scrawled down on this notebook underneath me of just research material for me to read and watch and try and get more into, because it really is, even though it doesn't seem like it, I really do think there's a huge connection between pro wrestling and TTRPGs when it comes to writing a story, when it comes to having these storylines that blur the boundaries between characters and people. Because I think D&D and games like that are also sort of similar, where you have these characters you play, but there's obviously a lot of heart from you in them as well. And it was a really interesting blend to find myself in the middle of. As I will speak for Nick because he's not here and he can't stop me. Nick likes to say, he goes, that one of the biggest things as a wrestling fan, or Mark he calls himself, he says, is we see a show, and if it's a bad show, we go, I would have booked that better. I bet you I could have booked that better. And that always stuck with me. He told me that years ago, but it always stuck with me because when people in my family and extended friend group ask, well, what is D&D? Because I DM professionally, people pay me to run games. They go, what is D&D? And I go, D&D is like when you're watching a movie, a Marvel movie or superhero movie, whatever, or a fantasy movie, and you're watching and you're going, if I were in the movie, I would have done it differently. And that sort of mirror, that foil between how I feel about D&D and how Nick felt watching wrestling, I really felt, I'm like, there's something here. There's something that you can make something great out of.
Yeah. Hold on one moment. I need to hit the BRB for a minute. And we are back. Sorry about that, folks. So, and yes, I did. It's funny you mentioned that I covered wrestling TTRPGs in the past, because there were a few, and believe me, I'm going somewhere with this, because there at the top end there was stuff like Wild World Wrestling and Squared Circle. The middle there was Power Drivers and Power Bombs, which is a nice beer and pretzel affair, and below that there was Wild World, which I was not satisfied with. I know that there were some improvements that were made with second edition, but the core problem was still there. It's still playing it straight. And what I mean by that is it is a powered by the Apocalypse framework trying to be a wrestling game rather than the reverse.
Yeah. It wasn't built ground up.
It wasn't built ground up to emulate wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've probably played your fair share of wrestling video games, right?
Yes, I have. Boy, I love them.
So what's the one thing that's almost mandatory in a wrestling video game since, I want to say, since the 90s?
Career mode. Make your own character, do your own career.
Mm-hmm. Just some kind of create a wrestler. And obviously the peak of this kind of thing is Fire Pro Wrestling Returns, now surpassed by Fire Pro Wrestling World. Because yeah, you can do a lot of stuff with like the 2K games, but when it comes to manipulating the AI, that's not really an option there. Whereas in FPW, it very much is. And that was where I had the problem, because the first problem with trying to do PBTA in wrestling form is the playbooks. They are classes in all but name, and we talked about this before we went live. This is not something that you can really do classes with. You could do leveling, yeah, but not classes. And it looks like, if I'm reading this correctly, the approach you're taking is a series of archetypes that you can lean into or out of as you see fit, not necessarily classes.
We try and keep it very loose. So we have, and I believe it's 7. We have 7 styles, wrestling styles, and these are generally things that you'd expect to see. High flyers, you've got your powerhouses, you have your ring technicians, and that sort of thing. And we say, hey, pick one of these. But the truth is, how much it influences for your character really is how much you want to put on it. For example, each one of these styles has a whole list of signature moves. We've got over 150 signature moves in the game that all are quite unique in what they can do and how. And each one of these styles has a list of moves underneath them. But you can pick your signature move from any style. Picking the same one as your style only gives you rolling +2 dice, which is not a big deal on that move itself. The styles are less there to define what you can do and more there to point you in the right direction. Just say, hey, if you want to build this type of character, these are kind of the things you're going to shoot for. Similarly, each style has its own traits, and they as well sort of allow you to hone in exactly how you want to play. But there are ways in the game that you can get traits from other styles. We like the idea of having these styles, these classes, but it was very important, especially to Nick, but also to myself, that they remained quite loose, because when it comes to wrestling, when pro wrestling, anywhere you go, they don't walk into the ring and the ref says, this is this wrestler, they're a striker, by the way, right? They aren't strikers, they're people, and we wanted you to be able to build people.
And with that in mind, I'd like to do a little bit of name association. I'm gonna go through the archetypes that you have, the styles, and
Sure.
I'd like you to give me the first wrestler that comes to mind.
Oh gosh, I can't do this. I don't know them. I don't know enough of them. I need Nick for that one. Well, we can try, I suppose, but I don't think I can.
All the more reason to bully Nick afterwards.
Yeah.
So, Colossus,
Oh, Andre the Giant.
with or without drinking 100 beers in one sitting.
um, Either with maybe.
Um, Flyers.
See, that's a tough one because Flyers I don't know as well. Um, I'm gonna ask for a pass. It's
Gangsters.
Nick's favorite style. Gangster. Oh gosh. See, it's hard to nail one for gangster. I'm going to say people are going to be very angry at me about this, but I'm going to say Roman Reigns a little bit. You know, with the bloodline and all the people he brings into it. Once again, personalities, not styles. But that's my answer.
Yeah. Powerhouse.
I'll go with John Cena. Seems easy enough for me.
Strikers.
Ooh. I'm gonna say Shawn Michaels.
Right. Technicians.
Technician. I don't know one for technician either. I should. I've seen a couple. I don't have one for that either.
Wild.
I need to watch more. Wild. The Undertaker.
Yeah, I figured that one.
I've gone for Bray Wyatt too.
Yeah, it's funny that you brought up your background with MMA because as much as some MMA diehards hate to admit it, MMA promotions take a lot from pro wrestling, especially the territory era.
Absolutely.
Some of them more than other. I'd say if there's anybody who really embraced that link between wrestling and MMA, it was guys like Chael Sonnen.
Mm-hmm. I think also, even some stuff with Conor McGregor, controversial figure as he is, you know, he loves his promos, or at least he used to, you know, back when he was especially big. He loves going out there, picking fights with people, filming his own interviews and everything like that.
Yeah, I just look at Sonnen as one of the greats who really pioneered that whole thing of putting so much emphasis on trash talk, on being this over the top personality. He wasn't really that over the top, but he was certainly drinking arrogant bastard ale, and he would tell you that. That or doing things like pretending to fall asleep while he's on the other end of the table from Tito Ortiz, who he really doesn't like.
Yeah.
I'd like to.
I mean, it's rife with it, that whole position. Sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to say John Jones also leaned into that, but the problem was John Jones got in his own damn way too many times.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a phenomenal talent, but he's also an idiot. But I'm pretty. But even with that, when it comes, one of the things that I couldn't help but notice is this is still very much built for a kind of PvP approach. You have it that the players are not controlling like one wrestler; they're controlling a group, almost like a stable, and controlling the managers as well. Was that a means to have it that it's not just the GM having to do all the work when it comes to matches?
Well, we wanted it. We very much, you talked about earlier with wrestling, pro wrestling video games. where there's a big thing about building your own character. We very much wanted to capture that as well, but we wanted to go to the next logical step. We wanted you to be able to have your own faction, and we avoided calling them factions. We called them domains in the book, because we wanted you to be able to make factions with your friends, have small factions that are part of your domain but not all of it. We wanted people to have control over making all sorts of different types of wrestlers. Nick is a big fan of Legacy, so am I, and having these characters, when your wrestlers eventually retire, if anyone truly does retire in the pro wrestling scene,
How many
they
times did
pass
Terry Funk
on
retire in his life?
and then come back out. Well, regardless, that's written in the game as well. When you have to retire, quote unquote, there are a list of options you can do, and it certainly does involve coming back one day, perhaps. But
Or you've got
you
Dusty
retire,
Dusty
and you,
Rhodes, quote unquote, leaving town and then coming back as the Knight Rider.
hmm it's
Sorry, the
just,
Midnight Rider.
yeah, it's just so we when you do retire, you leave something behind that you can give to, for example, the young bloods within your domain, and you can create by yourself this great tapestry of a legacy of wrestlers. You could have, fathers passed to sons, which I know is done many a time in WWE, certainly, and
Oh,
other
it's
stories like
especially
that
done in
that you
Mexico.
write that. Yeah, true. I mean, it's you can't take family out of lucha libre, but or just Spanish culture altogether. But regardless, it had less to do with dividing the mechanical strain between the HOC, that's our version of the GM, and
Mhm.
the players, and it more so had to do with achieving a fantasy we felt everyone would enjoy far more. And part of that was including that the HOC as a player also gets their own domain that they can fill with anyone themselves. They're a player in this as much as anyone else. They just have some more responsibilities when it comes to helping write the storylines and assemble all that, like a real HOC does, and is often portrays the villain like a real HOC often does.
Mhm. And Ori, at, I remember back in the 2010s, in the 2000s and the 2010s, you had so many people trying to do the heel authority figure, basically trying to recreate what was done in the 90s, and every time it did not work. I'm glad that with the current way things are going, we've kind of gone past that. We don't really. If you look at the major promotions these days, that whole heel authority figure that attempt to try and recreate Mr. McMahon isn't done as much. Like Raw and SmackDown, they have their GMs, and neither of them are being heelish. If anything, their approach is basically telling the heels, "Do not fuck with me."
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna be pushed around. Whether it's
Yeah.
whether it's Adam Pierce or Nick Aldis, they both have the attitude of, I'm trying to run a show. Do not mess this up. If you mess this up,
Yeah.
there will be consequences.
And we want you as an HOC in our game, obviously, to have that level of flexibility as well, to choose how you run your ring. It's also interesting. Traditionally, as you know, in RPGs, the GM is not usually a person in the world.
No,
And
gee.
if they do have a GM PC,
Mhm.
sometimes people get quite angry about that. But in DWRPG, in the Definitive Wrestling RPG, it almost feels a little essential that the head of creative is a character in their own world.
Yeah, and I will note when I look at some of the match types, there's definitely some familiar ones, and there's also some deeper cuts that I saw. I'd say one of the bigger ones that was really a was really a case of doing doing a bit of a deeper cut was the fact that you had a bit of a Lucha Underground reference with one of the titles, the Olympus Has Fallen title.
Oh my gosh. I fell in love when Nick was telling me about that whole story. Obviously ours is called Olympus Has Fallen.
Mhm.
How am I forgetting what theirs
Gift to the
is
Gods.
called? Gift of the Gods, that's right. When he was telling me about that whole story arc, I loved it so much. I was like, okay, we have to have this in here. And in fact, our very first beta for the game, we got a whole group together and we said, you're the champions. And we ran a whole tournament for our Olympus Has Fallen, you know, their Gift of the Gods. We ran our version of that. That was the very first beta for the Definitive Wrestling RPG. I loved that so much.
You'd probably get a
And
kick
then
out
I
of
got,
the. Oh, good.
yeah, I just got stuck in that rabbit hole where I was looking into all that Lucha Underground stuff, and I went, wait, why do all these articles say these things may have happened between these episodes? And I fell down the hole of there are lost records of episodes we don't have from that era. Oh my
Mhm.
gosh, it was so wild.
Yeah. Now, you'd probably get a kick out of the naming convention of titles that Dragon Gate uses.
Okay.
Uh, like the I think if I recall correctly, the two big titles there are the Open the Dream Gate and Open the Freedom Gate. And the if you are the number one contender to either, you are given a key that you wear around your neck. That key is used to unlock a spot on the front plate of those belts, which has the person's name there. If you lose that, then that key is attached to the belt. Which I thought I'd bring in because you have the whole golden key thing with the Keys to Heaven match.
We do, yeah. The coming up with all the titles and the match types as well, the amount of heated debates Nick and I had, because and I mean this no offense to people who love pro wrestling, WWE and such, I do not believe have the greatest names for titles, with heavyweight champion and such like that, where it was, oh no, the big thing is the heavyweight championship. I'm like, okay, so do you have to be a certain weight class to win it? He's like, no. Oh, okay. Yeah, there's the Intercontinental Championship. I go, oh, so you have to go around the world and you have to beat all these people. He's like, well, no, it's just for the company. I'm like, what does it mean?
A lot of that
So,
is I can answer some of that. A lot of that kind of thing is vestiges. You know,
yeah,
the whole heavyweight thing, because because early wrestling was taking a lot of cues from boxing in that regard. The Intercontinental title was introduced into the WWF because supposedly Pat Patterson won it in a tournament in Rio de Janeiro. He didn't, but that was the story that they went with. And it's for that reason that you're right. Some of those names they're mostly out of habit than anything else. Which is why I brought up the title names in Dragon Gate, because it's not operating on that
yes,
setup.
I love that. I love that name. I love the convention. I just like the modular stick keys in belts sort of thing. I love that a lot. I don't know
Yeah.
why, but we had a lot of, or I had a lot of fun coming up with a lot of the new title names. Whereas
Um.
like we are not calling the tag team championship tag team championship. We can do better than this.
um. I suppose another example I'd bring up with this is how there's the how they how with All Japan's primary title is not the heavyweight title, it's the Triple Crown Championship, because
Yeah.
it is a merging of three different belts that were defended and kind of kept by All Japan, especially after their relationship with the NWA in the States fizzled out because, well, the NWA fizzled out. For the longest time, you had to carry three belts with you for the Triple Crown, but eventually they merged them into...
Hold on. I think what you mean to say is you got to carry 3 belts with you.
No,
You got the wonderful privilege of Japanese fantasy style, having a costume made entirely out of belts.
About the... That's... There's been plenty of people who were full-on belt collectors.
Slightly different? My bad.
No, you carried 3. You carried 3 belts with the Triple Crown and it's technically the Triple Crown Heavyweight Championship, but that everybody just calls it the Triple Crown, because it was a fusion of the PWF Heavyweight title, the NWA United National title, and the NWA International title.
No, I mean it makes sense, and I also think that is an example of being a vestige of a legacy carrying meaning into a name, which is, well, like the gift of the gods, and our version, Olympus Has Fallen, and such is, I think, just such a wonderful thing. Those sort of naming schemes that develop that way with so much history to them, and I like it a lot more than tag team champion. We have the Two Hearts title, I think, is ours.
I remember back in the day, Progress had this thing where the belt wasn't a belt. Like their world championship was a staff with the Progress Eagle. The tag belts weren't belts. It was 2 halves of a large, almost like Spartan shield that the champs carried. They eventually went back to particular belts, but I thought it was amusing that they did that. Mostly to try to stand out was the big reason why it was done.
Yeah. Certainly it carried around and sort of add to the costume, but not necessarily perhaps considering certain people's costumes and whether it worked or not, or the fact that now you have to carry around a Spartan shield.
Yeah. But it wasn't 2 people carrying 1 shield. It was a shield that split in half.
Right.
But beyond that, as I understand it, when it comes to the system that you're using, it is, I believe, D6 based. Is your core resolution mechanic?
Yes.
Now
we have what we call the FSE system,
all right,
which stands for failure, score, extra, which are the 3 things that can happen when you roll a die. You can get, fault, score, extra. You can get a fault, you can get a score, you can get an extra, and it's a dice pool system. So you pick up a whole bunch of D6s, however many your move says you do, plus bonuses here and there. You throw them out, and you're trying to get as many scores as their toughness, and then it does an effect on them, is sort of how easy as it goes. And then if you ever roll a 6, that's the extra. The die explodes. You roll an extra D6 on top of it. So theoretically, even if you're only rolling 1 die, you could have you could score infinite. And even if you're rolling 100 dice, you could score 0, which leads to some wild swings in the middle of matches, which is kind of what we were going for.
Yeah. And there's also 2 resources that I believe you have to keep an eye out for. One of them is intensity, and the other one is drive.
Yeah, well, drive is a skill that's very much important. If someone breaks you more than your drive, they can knock you out, and then once you're knocked out on the ground, they just pick up your leg and pin you, and that's kind of your elimination done. Intensity is important because every round you get, every spotlight as they're called, whenever you gain the spotlight, you get an amount of hype equal to the match's current intensity, and hype can be used on any move to roll extra dice. It's all about rolling extra dice, and so sometimes we're rolling as many as 16 dice.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely there for the dice goblins. So it sounds like this is not a sum-based die mechanic, but rather a success-based one.
Yes, it is. It is as far, and this could be wrong, but as far as I can tell, it's the only dice system I've seen that has both failure, that both deals in failure and success, but also deals with the idea that you have to get a certain amount of successes regularly. There are
Yeah.
some systems that do something similar, especially when you add exploding dice on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it obviously has relation to things like the fate system, to Burning Wheel, and uh,
Mm-hmm.
and other systems like it, but it has a very different take in the idea of, instead of looking for one or two successes on these dice, you're usually looking for 7 or 8. So you really need a lot of dice to get there, and so the exploding dice helps you with that.
Yeah. Now, with that in mind, I think instead of drive, the term I was thinking of was hype.
Oh yes, hype is probably the most important resource. They're called resources in the game
Mm-hmm.
that your character wants to track. There are other resources, but every character has hype, and those extra dice are very key, because some evil designer who I see every time I wake up and look in the mirror has sort of skewed the odds of every move versus the toughness you need to hit, the successes you need, against you. And so hype is a very important resource for having those dice to beat the odds.
Yeah. Now, since a lot of matches are going to be one-on-one, unless they're one of those big tags or something like that.
Red or what have you.
There's obviously going to be the issue of the other people at the table sitting on their hands, and I believe you have addressed this issue with the onlooker mechanic. Am I correct?
We do. It is really the foundation of this game, because Nick, I'm not going to name any wrestling RPGs out there. We've played a couple, but Nick always asked me, he's like, "Why don't you like these kinds of games?" And I said, "I don't like it. It's like in D&D splitting the party and having one person just play a session on their own. I don't like the idea of people playing a game where everyone else is sitting on their hands, and a lot of these wrestling RPGs have that. Our solution was, we said, when you're not a wrestler in the ring, I said, you need something to do. So let's make you part of the audience, which is always, Worldwide Wrestling RPG talks about this. It says, when you're not playing the game, be part of the audience, cheer them on, scream for who's going to win or lose. And the issue I have with this, just for Worldwide RPG, but others as well, they don't give you any benefits for being the audience. You're there, maybe cheering on for your friend for the sake of being a friend, but you have no stake in it. You know, it's not like watching wrestling on TV where you have your favorites and you really want them to win and you don't know if they're going to pull it out or not, right? You have stake, you're invested in these characters. In a TRPG like this, you're really more invested in your characters, more so than the character of your friend over there. And so by creating these onlooker rules, we said, hey, you're not a wrestler in this match. Take this little tiny quarter of a page card that is a mini character sheet,
Mm-hmm.
and they're for different types of fans who are in the ring. And it's done this wonderful thing on sort of both our sides of development. For me, as the mechanics developer, you get, let's say you want to be a saboteur. A saboteur has these this group of little tools they can use to alter and change a match. But more importantly, they have the special ability to get get money from people in the ring or people around the table if they're willing to get it. And so you are benefited by playing your role as a saboteur, by going out there and saying, hey, I mean, I could give you a bludgeon to hit the guy with.
Mm-hmm.
How much is it worth to you? You know, are you going to give me 2K for it? Because then I'll do it. If you don't give me 2K, I might just give it to the other guy. Sycophants choose a champion and they need that champion to win and keep getting hype. It benefits another wrestler they have later in the match. And so, or later in the show, rather, in a different match. So they're really cheering. There's a gambler who gambles based on who is going to win or lose and how long it's going to take. And when you have these stakes like this, not only on my side does it give you something to do, but on Nick's side of the theme, suddenly everyone's more invested in what's happening. Suddenly it's about more than just the two people in the ring. You have something riding on it, whether it's fame, whether it's fortune, whether it's some bonus for your match. You want this match to be crazy. And it just created this experience where suddenly playing the game, if we had 3 or 4 onlookers, people were actually cheering. And when there were reversals that didn't go their way, people were actually devastated, because they had their stake in the match. And it's really a lot of the foundation of what it is. It was really the two leading ideas for making the definitive wrestling RPG is, hey, Nick, if I'm going to do a battle RPG that's made for tournament arcs where players are fighting players, everyone at the table has to have something to do. And B, it's got to be a proper battle RPG. It's got to have resources and complications, and people have to be able to think it out and actually have a strategy rather than just roll dice and pray, as much as we do have a lot of rolling dice and praying.
And with that in mind, since intensifying is something that several of the moves can do, what is the benefit and downside to intensifying and de-intensifying?
So de-intensifying we call suppress. Intensify lifts the intensity, suppress brings it back down. The benefits and cost of it all is quite deep. On the surface, the higher the intensity, the more hype you get at the start of your turn. That means the more dice you have to roll every turn with your moves and such like that. And second of all, every signature move in the game has some intensity level that it requires in order to be used. You can't use the finishers at the start of a match. You need the intensity to be at a certain level to do it. And so you want to raise the intensity up to break out your signature moves and then eventually your finisher, eliminate someone and be victorious. The downside to it is usually when you intensify or suppress, you change the intensity not during your turn, not immediately, but at the start of the next wrestler's turn, which is usually your opponent. So if you're going to raise the intensity, you have to give them the chance to use it first. This is inherent to our passing of the spotlight, that you're trying to show off what each other can do, as much as you're trying to show off what you can do. The second downside is if you do care about winning, which some people do care about winning in this game. Other people's are just there to have a fun time and show off their stuff. But if you do care about winning, there is a big meta game, a big brain behind what intensity you want it to be, because certain styles favor different levels of intensity. A Colossus, for example, doesn't need high intensity. They can just go around and wallop someone and stand there like a brick house, regardless of how early or late in the match it is. Whereas other wrestlers, such as high flyers, are all about their big flashy finishers. They need it to be high intensity, which means once you find out where you want your intensity to be, making sure the intensity doesn't go where your opponent wants to be is a factor if that's how you want to play the game. And we certainly have a number of people who very much play the game that way, and most of them play technician because it has a lot of ways to manipulate the intensity.
And I'm guessing in that there's gonna be some archetypes that might fit better with, say, tag team. I'm guessing like Gangster might fit better with tag team matches.
Yes. Absolutely. Gangster, so different match types, which, to be clear for anyone at home, we took a bunch of common stipulations, we made them into types, and we said, hey, These are the generic types you're going to use. If you want to add stipulations or mix and match them, this is a role-playing game. Consult your HOC. You can do whatever you want. Uh, but different match types benefit, weirdly, these different types of wrestlers. I guess it's not weird, but it was more of a happy coincidence than intended design. An example of this is tag team, where in a tag team you have to leverage your wits, that's your wrestler's ring awareness, in order to know when you should tag in and out. And therefore, styles that prefer to have a lot of wits, whether they're technicians or gangsters, or sometimes even wilds, do very well in a tag team. Another example of this is in a battle royale, where the means of elimination is merely through being thrown out of the ring. You don't do pins or anything like that. And so a striker who is about doing as much damage as possible doesn't actually fare as well as a powerhouse or a colossus who has a lot more throws available to their register, to their glossary of moves. And like I said, it wasn't so much an intentional design, but as the game was being created, this naturally sort of fell that way, and we loved how it was and sort of leaned into it kind of hard. Powerhouses, for example, have a lot of drive, and during gauntlet matches, you can leverage drive in order to keep the spotlight. And we went, oh, that's great. The powerhouses are just happen to be really good at gauntlets. That kind of makes sense. They're oftentimes, the baby face usually is a signature, a 7 signature powerhouse. It'd be great to have them in a gauntlet match. That makes sense. Um, I don't have a great segue out of this answer of the question, but I hope that I answered the question.
Yeah. Now, I'd like to pick your brain for one particular match type and how this might work within your system. And this is one of those cases, and you can add this to the list of reasons to bully Nick. Have you ever seen Elimination Chamber?
Yes, I have, and it was at one point its own match type in our game.
All right. Have you seen or are familiar with War Games?
No, I don't know that one.
They've done it a couple times, but the basic question on this sort of thing is how one would handle those sorts of timed release effects. Because the idea with War Games is you have two teams of usually 4 or 5. Every few minutes, it starts with 2 people from each team. Every few minutes, one person from one side comes in. When everybody is in, it becomes the match beyond, and that's when you can do pins.
So we have a form of timing in our game called spotlights. A spotlight is effectively a turn in any other RPG. When your wrestler has the spotlight, you're acting, and everyone else has to just respond to what you're doing. And there are reversals and such, but that is the gist of it. The important thing about spotlights in this context is we actually use spotlights to count the duration of a match, how long it's supposed to go on, and in fact to cut it if it's been going on too long. A battle royale is a good example of this, where right now in the game, the way it works is whenever a wrestler passes the spotlight, instead of giving it to a wrestler inside of the ring already, the HOC can give it to someone outside the ring and then bring them in doing so. And then once everyone is in the ring, the battle royale enters a second phase where it says, okay, now whoever is left in the ring, you have 4 spotlights to do as much damage as possible, and then we go to lights out, which is our form of a final confrontation to end it there and choose a winner. So very similarly, if I can speak correctly, Elimination Chamber would work a very similar way. It's why we took it out in the end, where I went, well, you could just have an exhibition match, a multi-exhibition match, but add a stipulation from something we already have, the Battle Royale, where you have people enter in when spotlights are passed and that sort of thing, and you can add a similar timer that shifts into a second phase. Wargame, I haven't heard of, but based on how you described it, I think you can handle a similar way of just saying whenever you're an allied wrestler is what I'd say, and I would make it an arena move. These are moves that are linked with certain match types. I'd make an arena move that the commander uses, where whenever one of your wrestlers passes the spotlight, you can do this reversal, this arena move, where you leverage your wits and you let one of your teammates enter the ring now. And once everyone's in, if there is a second phase to it where that's where pins are allowed, you just put those in the spotlight rules. You say once everyone's in the rings, you have X number of spotlights till the end of the match, and pins are enabled because you can disable them as well in grounds of elimination.
Mm-hmm. I can get that. Now, with that in mind, how do you have advancement work? I remember covering Wild World Wrestling, and it had a level system, but the level was function as well a level, and also your spot on the card. You know, level 1 is like
Sure.
curtain jerker, level 10 was main eventers.
Yeah, we go a little more abstract with it, but we have the same sort of heart and soul to that, where we say so everyone starts unusually at level 0 effectively. You start as a fresh wrestler, you're a young blood, you're in there, unless for some reason you're making more veteran at the command. HOC can say anything they want, it's a role-playing game, but typically you make a young blood wrestler. Now, as you complete shows, your wrestlers gain what we call scars. Scars are a form of level. We just don't call it that. We just say, hey, you've got a scar. And every time you get a scar,
Mm-hmm.
you get some sort of bonus. We give a list of things you can get. Just to quickly say a couple, you can learn a new move. You can get better with a move you already have. You can pick up a trait or expand your origin, your backstory, and that sort of stuff. And then once you have a certain amount of scars, we say, all right, you're not a young blood anymore. You've taken some hits, you've been through a lot, you got these 3 scars, you're prime time. You're the big muscle. And then once you get more scars past that, there's a point where we go, you're not in your prime time anymore, you're getting on in your age, you're an old veteran.
Mm-hmm.
And then past that, you have to retire. And we have these sort of 3 tiers of veterancy, divided into levels, 1 through 10, or I guess 0 through 10 technically. And the scars are the advancement is more or less as simple as that. Every time you get a scar, you get to improve your wrestler in one of a number of ways.
Mm-hmm. I can get that. And give when I looked at character creation with that, one of the things I noticed was the fact that you have it somewhat randomized in a way not too dissimilar from the 3d6 rule that more litigious role-playing games are known for. In a future installment, do you guys plan on putting an option if somebody wanted to go a more point-buy approach?
I'm not certain that we would. The reason we have it the way that we do, where you roll dice, and actually in the most recent beta we'll be playing tomorrow, you roll 6 dice instead of 5. We've had some minor changes here and there, but the reason we have it random the way we do is because, unlike, let's say, a traditional TRPG like D&D, in D&D you have one character usually, and that's it, and you run that character. In a game like this, you can make as many characters as your HOC allows for, and so you can have a whole roster of young bloods and pick the one you like most to continue with in certain ways. And we like that because having low skills in this game, low numbers, is not a pure detriment like it would be in something like D&D. Having low skills in this game gives you other benefits. As an underdog, as an underdog in a fight, you always get to start with the spotlight. For example, you get access to certain origins that other stronger wrestlers don't get access to. And so there's benefit for having low skills and high skills. And we found that not only in this game, but other games we play, there are a lot of people who enjoy playing these underdogs. And we feel if you want to have a point buy system where you just get to choose who has what, the HOC can already do that when they build whatever wrestler that they want. If you build a Youngblood who has max 6 stats and everything, it ends up with 9 flair, 7 drive, 9 toughness, and 6 wits. Your wrestler might seem incredibly powerful, but in a game with as much strategy and chance with those huge pools of dice that we have, all it takes is a single triple threat with both people ganging up on you to make all the difference in the world. And if that's the fantasy you want to tell and your HOC is all right with that, you can go ahead and write whatever stats you want.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really mind, and I don't know if adding a point buy system to character creation would make too much of a difference with that. I really would just prefer people roll the dice, and you could almost assign the skills randomly and just play with what you've got if you want.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. Now, the version that you had sent me was about 68 pages. I'm guessing that even with future installments, this thing isn't going to go over 100 pages.
It's probably not, and in fact, I think. Did the version I sent you have the customized signature moves in it?
No.
Okay, so we've worked on it since then, and due to some things moving around and a lot of editing and rewording, we've actually added a lot more content, and it's still about 70 pages. So no doubt as we continue to work on it, there's things we'll be able to cut or reword or move in certain ways. It probably won't make it to 100 pages. Maybe it'll go to 80 as we add more art, but I couldn't say right now. I mean, by no means is 80 pages a small RPG, but it's not a 420-page, Dungeons and Dragons tome or Pathfinder 2nd edition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can certainly get
even yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And do you have plans on putting in like a public demo or playtest version or something along those lines?
Well, we have a playtest version that is updated basically weekly on our Kickstarter. Mm-hmm. Right on our Kickstarter, you scroll down, it says how can I get involved or how can I play, and it will link you to an open Google Drive that's got a playtest that says the date it's been updated, and it updates every week. We run a number of playtests, and we hope people out there go in and run them themselves as well. It is. We didn't keep anything back. We have everything experimental in there, and we just say, hey, take everything but the kitchen sink and run with it.
Mm-hmm. I can certainly get that. Well, with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my temple and enjoy the madness that happens around here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for inviting us over.
Yeah. Thank you for being open to coming on, and make sure to bully Nick afterwards.
Oh, I will.
And of course, anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged. And of course,
definitely on that.
A sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody!